superstar Titus O'Neil.
It only takes a moment to make a moment.
Take time to be a dad today. Learn more at 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov.
Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
This program is supported by San Juan Regional Medical Center, who's expanding its services to offer low-cost blood screenings all year round, now offering walk-in convenience to get the blood tests you want when you want them. MyLabs, patient-ordered testing, is available in Farmington at the hospital's laboratory and the Outpatient Diagnostic Center on 30th Street. Also in Aztec at San Juan Health Partners Family Medicine at 120 Llanos Street. With nearly 20 tests available, there's an option for everyone. MyLabs, patient-ordered testing, a wellness service of San Juan Regional Medical Center. This program on KSJE is supported by Citizens Trust and Investment Corporation, providing a competent, innovative, and caring team of professionals to serve wealth management, trust administration, employee benefit plans, retirement planning, and estate settlement needs. Find out more about Citizens Trust and Investment Corporation at 505-599-0181. Ten minutes past 8 o'clock. It's Wednesday morning, June the 5th. And good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Micklin. Thank you for tuning in to KSJE 90.9 FM, the information and cultural beacon of the Four Corners, broadcasting to you from our visual radio studios at San Juan College. And that means a special good morning also to our viewers who are watching me live this morning on the KSJE Facebook page and YouTube channel. Welcome aboard, everybody. We're glad you are with us. Coming up in just a moment, my guest, we're talking archaeology today. Normally, he is here on Thursdays, but this month we've got Paul Reed on Wednesday to talk about archaeology and technology, along with a special guest. Dr. Carrie Heitman from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln is going to also be in our studio, so join us coming up in just a few moments here on KSJE. And then, of course, we will check in with Dr. Mike Haddabaugh with the Encouragement Lab. It's a previously aired Encouragement Lab segment, but it's always important. Dr. Haddabaugh reminds us why it's important to always make your bed. So if you did that this morning, you're one step ahead of me. But he'll be talking more about that today at 8:55 right here on KSJE. Mick Hess is coming in, Roving with the Arts, at 9 a.m. He is playing Bruckner's Symphony No. 5. Anton Bruckner's Symphony No. 5 today at 9:06 on Roving with the Arts. And then today it's our local and regional author program right on Four Corners. And Tracy Hales-Vass is talking to author Kevin Bookoff, who's also a ventriloquist, as you'll see from the image on our visual radio stream this morning. But Kevin has written the book, I Forgot That I Remembered, and they'll be talking about that today on KSJE. So we hope you will join us for that program today at 10:30. You can, of course, listen at KSJE.com or online there on our website, or at 90.9 FM, or now in Durango at 103.3 FM. If you're in the Durango area, you can listen on your radios in the Durango area. So we're glad to be in Durango these days as well. Also, if you're looking for something to do around the region today, tomorrow, this week, we invite you to check out our regional events calendar at KSJE.com. And as you can see on the screen right now, there's lots of things that are coming up, including open mic night at Clancy's Pub, the jazz duo happening at the Cypress Cafe up in Durango, Jazz Jam, of course, every Wednesday, so you can check that out. Four Corners Photographic Society having an exhibit at the museum, at the Farmington Museum at Gateway Park. Downtown's Makers Market is starting up this week. Our Cottonwood Concert Series that KSJE is a proud sponsor of begins June 7th at the Farmington Public Library, featuring Jill Cohn. Just some of the many events that are going on this month and more that you'll find if you just go to our regional events calendar at KSJE.com. And quickly, a brief check on the weather forecast, and we want to take you over to Chama, New Mexico this morning, where the temperature right now is about 48 degrees. Trains, as you can see, are getting ready to leave the station. If you're watching us live this morning, that's an image from a few moments ago. Look how green it is in Chama these days. And, of course, they're expecting some showers in their forecast today in Chama. The temperature right now, 48 degrees. It's going to get all the way up to 61 in Chama later on today. And tonight's low getting down to to 40 degrees. Here at home, it's going to be 76 degrees for a high today in Farmington with some scattered showers in the forecast. Tonight's low 51 with some rain showers again in the area. Then warming up tomorrow with mostly sunny skies for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Highs about mid-80s beginning on Thursday, and overnight lows in the mid to lower 50s. Joining me here in the studio once again for his monthly visit with me is local archaeologist Paul Reed from Salmon Ruins and Archaeology Southwest. Paul, good morning.
Scott, good morning. So glad to be back in person here.
I know, twice in a row.
We're on a streak here.
We are
keep this one going.
On a streak. It's nice to have you here, and you brought a special guest for the program this month, and that is Dr. Carrie Heitman, who is joining us from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Talk about some of her work. And Dr. Heitman, good morning to you.
Hi, good morning. It's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us, and I appreciate you being here as well. And let's start the program by talking a bit about what brings us all together, which is this really interesting idea of bringing some of your work into the internet age, I suppose, and having some very interactive websites available for folks to be able to use when we talk about places like Salmon Ruins and things like that in Chaco Canyon.
Right, Scott. We've discussed it a couple times on the show, but we now actually have some other data and some interesting angles, I hope, to present in this show. But yeah, with partnership with Carrie, with Dr. Heitman, with a colleague Worthy Martin at the University of Virginia, and with Salmon Ruins, of course, and Director Larry Baker out there, we created the Salmon Pueblo Archaeological Research Collection, or SPARC, and this has been ongoing since 2015. We got funding through the National Endowment for the Humanities, or NEH. Got about a nice little chunk of $300,000, which each of the institution matched in different ways.
Right.
Mostly with folks putting in time to help launch it. And so, yeah, we're excited. And I was thrilled with Carrie being in town and being able to come in and talk a little more about this. And because Carrie has deeper roots than SPARC, which, she can launch into and tell us a little more about.
Very good. And we're showing at least the homepage of what we're talking about here with the Salmon Pueblo Archaeological Research Collection. That's online, and that's why we always say if you're just listening to the radio program, there's so much more if you watch us on the Facebook page or the KSJE YouTube channel, and so we will be trying to share a few of the visuals as we talk about some of these things. But Dr. Heitman, let me turn to you and ask you a little bit about your involvement with this project. And a lot of folks may be listening saying, well, Nebraska is really far away from New Mexico. What's the connection? And so This is part of your work, though, correct?
Sure. Yeah, so I've been involved in these kind of public-facing digital archaeology projects for, I don't know, maybe close to 20 years now, 18, something like that. So to me, this is a really important part of what we as archaeologists can and should be doing with our work. So often, especially in an academic space, we tend to put our research into places that really only get read by the handful, maybe a dozen if we're lucky, other experts in our particular area of expertise. But this is an opportunity for us to both share the primary research, the original excavation data from these important projects, as well as the products of some of that research. And as you mentioned, I have a history that goes back with this some time, and so the precursor actually, so we should mention the website.
Yes.
So the SPARC project is salmonpueblo.org. Is our URL, so you can check us out there.
Right.
And help us with our web stats.
Exactly, right. It's all about the clicks.
That's right.
Yes.
But the precursor to this project actually was one that was funded by a different funding agency, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, twice funded a project called the Chaco Research Archive. And that had its roots really going back to 2001 and 2002 with the work of Steve Plog, who is just now, right about this time, this week, retiring from the University of Virginia. But he, in collaboration with the colleague we mentioned, Worthy Martin, and myself, and many, many, many others, have worked together on the Chaco Research Archive for quite some time. And the goals with SPARC were really the same, in the sense that there's, decades often long, in the case of Chaco proper, the park, Chaco Cultural National Historical Park, the excavation history goes back to the 1890s, and we have all of this information that is in the Chacoan case, scattered all over the country, in some cases all over the world, in places like the American Museum of Natural History, at Tulane University, the various Smithsonian institutions in DC. And so a digital project like this allows us to do something called virtual reunification, right? So we can take some of that information, working with all of those repository institutions, digitize and where relevant, extract information so it's more usable, and then share that with a wider audience.
And searchable, I would suppose,
That's
too, now
absolutely
that it's
right.
online, right?
If we've done our work right, yes.
Yes.
It's searchable.
And I would assume, though, that there's just so much from all these years of study and excavation and things like that, that having it all kind of in one place is somewhat extraordinary, because it hasn't been in one place for all these years, correct?
That's right. And so that was really probably the fundamental impetus for doing the Chaco Research Archive project, was just that recognition that these things, just because of how work was done at the time and burgeoning natural history museums, were really interested in having these type collections from various places like Cahokia and Chaco and Moundville and you name it, right? All of the big sites in the United States. They wanted to have substantial collections from those places, and so they were all actively working to try to create those collections, and which is part of the reason why we ended up with things scattered from coast to coast.
Interesting. And now I would assume that, and maybe incorrectly, that not every site like Chaco and Salmon has websites like this. This is something very new, is it not?
That's correct. Yeah, not every site does, though.
Is that a goal, though, maybe to get more?
Absolutely, and there are lots of really great and smart people working on this for all those places I mentioned and more.
Yes.
In some cases, we've mentioned the digital humanities here this morning, so there are people working in that space, but also within anthropology and archaeology and classical archaeology, you name it, to try to do this kind of work, sometimes with massive repositories, so not something that's as site-specific as what Paul and I have been working on with Salmon and with the Chaco Research Archive. But those larger projects are something called DINA, the Digital Index of North American Archaeology. They're working state by state, actually, to aggregate in site records from state historic preservation offices. So there's lots of different levels in which this work is happening, all really with hopefully the same kinds of goals that we've had in mind for these projects, which is to ethically and responsibly increase access to this information and make sure that taxpayers and more people have access to that.
Well, that's the key, I guess, too. And Paul Reed, it seems like this is very transparent of what you're trying to accomplish here with making the stuff available to everybody, everywhere, no matter what, all the warts and all, I suppose, of what you're finding.
Right, definitely, and that's something that was very important to us as we developed this project, as a child of the CRA. And, what's particularly interesting for me at Salmon is the CRA covers lots of sites in Chaco and Aztec ruins and some others. What we were able to do at Salmon was to do a really deep dive into just this single place. And, we joke about this a lot. This is the site out at Salmon that most people go out to see when they're in 4th grade, right? And if we're lucky, they'll come back for another visit. So certainly part of the effort here with the outreach, beyond the archaeological community and the historian community and others, is to get people to come back to Salmon Pueblo, to Salmon Ruins, and check it out and see what's going on. And if they're not able to do that, then they can dig into our website. We have 13,000 images, which is phenomenal, and you can literally look at any aspect of the site, look at all the rooms, look at the surface, look at the way the site looked before it was excavated, look at some regional aerial photographs that are up there. So really just, again, a deep dive into this outstanding place.
Right, and the idea to help maybe the folks who aren't as connected as you both are to maybe experience what it was like maybe back when it was first discovered by these archaeologists who did this before it was excavated and things like that, or even what it looked like when folks were living there, I suppose, if you go back far enough.
Right. I mean, as I've talked on the program, we have a different project we did called Chaco's Legacy, which has some 3D reconstructions and things.
Right.
And we don't have a lot of those images loaded up at this point, but it's certainly something that we've thought about for the future, was to be able to connect that and give folks that look as well. The other exciting thing for me, and this connects to what Carrie's been doing for her 20-some years, and that's about where I'm at. I work for an organization called Archaeology Southwest, as you know, that is Well, our founder is really one of the leading proponents of the notion of doing what we call preservation archaeology. So this is going back into museum collections and really trying to learn what we can from what's already on the shelves. And Carrie can certainly speak to this in greater detail. So much of the collections from Chaco have never been looked at. And we talk about this. I do some tours out at Chaco, and I always tell groups, we know this much, and we've had a very specific project now recently that looked at these artifacts from Pueblo Bonito. But, I don't even know what percentage, 75, 80% probably of these collections have literally never been looked at. They're cataloged in some cases, and you can get to them. But, these entry points with the Chaco Research Archive with Salmon give people a chance to say, hey, there's some really neat stuff out there. And, as a layperson, I'd like to learn more about it. But also for our people in our field, a lot of that, we've had now, I think, 3 folks working on dissertations, maybe 5, and master's degrees who've sort of dived into the Spark website as an entry point and then have come to Salmon to say, hey, I see all these cool artifacts through your website. Let's dig in a little deeper. That's one of the main points of this work, is to create those entry points.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And Dr. Heitman, I mean, again, as folks are looking at these things and maybe coming up with different theories about why this object was found in this particular room or why this was left here or what have you, is that some of the things that Paul's talking about?
Sure, absolutely. These kind of resources, we recognize that we're serving so many stakeholders, whether it's descendant communities for whom these are ancestral places, or whether it's the academic archaeologist who's designing a research project about maybe scale of agricultural production at Pueblo Bonito. Something germane to my own interest just pops into my head.
Well, sure, sure.
So something along those lines, or an avid avocationalist who has spent time at Chaco and is extremely knowledgeable and wants an opportunity to actually really engage with the primary excavation data. I suppose I shouldn't have been quite as surprised as I was that how many of our users, and I couldn't give you exact numbers, but just sort of anecdotally having talked to quite a few people and seen just the, at least we have more data about, the web statistics, for instance, for the Chaco Research Archive, just the scale at which the general public has really avidly gone in and really engaged with this information in meaningful and powerful ways, and expressing real gratitude for having that opportunity, because it's not something that we necessarily the public necessarily gets to have access to. And I think Paul mentioned, these kinds of resources, we can't magically transport everybody into the collections at the American Museum of Natural History or to the basement collections at Salmon or wherever it is. But what we can do is give people important building blocks upon which to then build maybe a research project. And so, my students and lots of other students around the country have been able to successfully use resources like this to actually say, oh, okay, I see from this online resource, the Field Museum has these kinds of copper artifacts from the Hopewell Mounds, and I'm interested in that. I want to do a sourcing study. And so now they can actually have the information that they need on the front end to be able to design a project and go forth and do that kind of work.
Right, and I would think that it has other uses as well. I'm thinking even almost tourism, perhaps. We know we always talk about we live in a ground zero location for archaeology and studies of these ancient populations, and it seems to me like those of us who live here sometimes forget how very important our region is in this whole field, and how many great sites we have just literally in our backyards and without having to travel too far. And there are folks that travel, I know, from Asia and Europe and all over the world to come to the American West to see some of these great sites that we have that we sometimes take for granted. And I assume having them online maybe can stir up a bit more of that interest and let folks kind of see before they get here of what to expect or what it looked like before and what they're going to see later, and lots of opportunities.
Right, and I wish our colleague Dr. Worthy Martin could be here too. But one of the things we've been doing, at least with the Chaco Research Archive material, is actually building a web application, which we can't show you. It exists, but we haven't put it like in the iTunes store. It's kind of a long and complicated story, but
as we say in radio, stay tuned, everybody. That's right.
But that is ideally what resources like this allow you to do, is then also to enhance an experience of a tourist that's coming and, say, walking around Chaco. It's one thing to be in a room as it is preserved today in 2019,
right?
But it's something else to actually be standing in that room and have the opportunity, hopefully in a shady spot so you can actually see your screen.
True.
And to be able to look at historic excavation images to see what did the floor of this room look like? What were the artifacts that were coming out of this space, for instance, which adds obviously a whole other layer of enrichment to your experience of that space.
Sure, because when we go and see these places, even at Chaco or Aztec or Salmon, it's hard to maybe for a visitor who doesn't have your background, both of you, to maybe understand what these rooms looked like, because obviously they've been kind of cleaned up for tourists.
That's right.
So nobody's bumping into things and breaking priceless things and what have you. And so to see how the room appeared when it was first discovered after being abandoned for how many hundreds of years is significant, I suppose.
It is, and to go back to Spark for a minute, that there are lots of those photographs in the archive. We
I'm going to show some right now.
Yeah,
you mentioned it, Paul Reed.
Bring some up. We tried. Of course, we had different ways to sort through, but one of the things that the project pioneered in part was taking Polaroid photographs of excavations underway. So, a lot of times in archaeological work, there's a real focus on getting that final shot, right? So you're down to the floor of the room, and perhaps there's some artifacts in place, and and of course, in those days, they had a couple of project photographers who would come over with their, high-end cameras and take some really nice photos. But those photographers weren't available for some of the more immediate finds that came out. So one of the things I like about the photo archive, just going through it, is all the Polaroids, and there's varying quality because, as we know, Polaroids are not meant to last. I'm actually surprised in some ways at the quality of some of them nearly 50 years later. But folks would stop and say, "Hey, wow, this is really neat. I've got a ceramic vessel in context here, and there's a piece of roof that came down next to it." So they would get those photographs, and lo and behold, the ones that are viewable and usable are in the archive now, so you can go back and look at those. So yeah, the app development that Gary's talking about, I think, is something that's really going to be exciting once that comes is available.
Right. And as we're looking at just some of these, a lot of these appear to be black and white, probably from earlier periods, correct? And then move into color maybe the more you go into it and dive into it.
One of the standards for what we do are black and white photos, and then we try to do color as well. So there's kind of a mix.
I see.
But yeah, the one that you've got up there in the sort of second right position on the top is the PI of the project, an amazing woman named Cynthia Irwin-Williams, who we've talked about here and there on the show. And there's Cynthia throwing a shovelful into the screen. So that's what you
do. Isn't that what you do?
Epic shots.
Yeah, right.
And she loved to be in the field. That's part of her lasting legacy.
How many shovelfuls do you throw in a screen on a site?
Thousands.
Yeah.
Maybe tens of thousands.
I can only imagine. Right.
So yeah, that's kind of a fun action shot there. But I do
from
think,
about what era are we thinking about? What year do you think this might be? It probably says it if I scroll down.
It's probably 73 or 4. Let's see if I've gotten it right.
Say?
If it's in there.
I don't see it here.
Yeah, well, that's good. So it can be whatever I want it to be.
Okay.
I suspect it's kind of in the middle 70s.
Okay. But just to let you know. Yeah.
And Cynthia wore these white shirts and a beret was part of her uniform, dark pants, and she loved the field work. So anyway, so she's kind of she is the person who started this almond project. So
right.
It's, and various things have been done to honor her legacy, but nice to give a little shout out to Dr. Cynthia Irwin-Williams.
Sure.
Also one of the first women to graduate from Harvard with a degree in anthropology.
Nice.
So in 1963.
Very nice. But again, for folks who are familiar with Salmon Ruins and Chaco Canyon, these are great websites and resources to be able to refamiliarize yourself with some of the newer work that's been done, the original work that was done, and things like that, and to kind of show us again, and getting some of these collections from other locations into one place, I suppose. is what we're talking
Right.
about. I want to talk a little bit about the other one at Chaco Canyon as well, because that's another significant endeavor, correct, that you all have been working on. Yeah. And so talk to me a bit about that again. So this is a kind of same type of thing and aims for the same goal?
Right. So I mentioned this one is the precursor to the Spark project, and so it went through two major phases, and the first one, gosh, I'm going to get a little rusty on the dates here, but the first phase focused on 5 sites. We were, if you kind of bring up that Chaco Sites page there at the top menu in the middle, and then primary navigation, if you go
Right
to that
there?
Chaco, yeah, that.
Exploring the canyon, is that where you
No,
want to
go to the Chaco Sites page.
That
there,
page in the middle, right.
So when we first started, our first launch actually
There it
focused
is.
on just 5 of the sites that are on that map, and we were targeting a mix of great houses and small houses. So if you've been to Chaco, you're familiar. There's a really massive monumental great houses, places like Pueblo Bonito.
Right.
And then there's smaller, more modest buildings that kind of stand out in stark contrast to those really massive buildings that are predominantly, though not exclusively, on the south side of the canyon. So when we first started the project, we were focusing on 5 sites that were a mix of great house and small house sites, and then we expanded that out to include more great house and more small house sites, and then we expanded further still, actually, to include what we call survey data. So archaeologists, in addition to excavation, which is what I think probably most people think of as
Right.
the major toolkit for
Right.
what archaeologists do, we also do an important part of the work we do is survey. So actually going out, and this part of the world is fantastic in that way because you can be walking across the landscape and actually be seeing the remnants of sites that were 1,000 or more old that are still evident to you on the surface. That is, having worked in the eastern United States, that is not the case.
Right.
You don't put a shovel in the ground, you're not going to find anything.
Right. Very different. We talked
that's
about
right.
that too, I think,
Yeah.
Paul Reed, of how I don't want to say easier, but just maybe how accessible some of these things are here in this part of the world than in other places that are maybe covered in vegetation and people.
Right,
I
and
suppose.
just the dryness of the climate too means things survive.
Yes.
The East Coast soils and humidity pretty much eat every artifact, even the metal, right? Ultimately, and you get
Right.
hard stuff there that survives. But yeah, like Carrie had said, there's nothing like walking across the landscape and finding a 15-year-old Basket Maker 3 pit house that's, certainly looking a little different than it did when the folks left at 650, for example. But you can see the remnants of the house. You can a lot of times find the central fireplace, and then
You
broken
can see
pottery.
that. I can't see that. I think it's a rut in the road or something.
We've talked
but-
about the training, Scott.
I
so
know.
We'll get you.
I'm
We'll
trying
get
to
you,
pay
we'll get
attention.
you out in the field. And,
Right.
Yeah, no, and I mean that's actually an interesting component. Carrie mentioned the avocational interest, and archaeology as we know it probably wouldn't exist without the avocational folks who are part of different archaeological societies that are usually community-based. The San Juan Archaeological Society here, and then ones throughout our state and really every state. So those folks go out and train and do work, and we've talked about site stewards before,
Right,
and the
that's
site
true.
watch program. So, and those are a lot of times they can be retired archaeologists, but other times they're just interested in members of the public who go through some training and go out and learn these things. So I have hope for you.
Okay.
Yes, we'll get you out there.
Good. Very good. Don't give up on me yet. So that's important. But fascinating stuff. And again, Dr. Heitman, from your area of the world in Nebraska, there's a lot of interesting facts about peoples that lived in the Midwestern part of the country that maybe folks who live in New Mexico aren't as familiar with. But it's
Sure.
fascinating, I think, too, right?
Yeah.
About some of the discoveries that have been made.
Yes, right. No, it's true, and I am not the best person to speak about that. I'm a Southwestern specialist, but
I
no,
see.
that's absolutely right.
I'm assuming you learned something from osmosis or
Of
something
course,
from
of
being
course,
there,
of
right?
course. There's the Omaha, the Ponca, the Pawnee,
Right.
and so on. So there's all sorts of ancestral sites from those groups in the Midwest, and we've got archaeology going back to Paleo-Indian times. So the thing that maybe is interesting or might be of interest to listeners to note about Nebraska that's quite different than where we sit right now here in New Mexico is that public lands in the state of Nebraska account for less than 1%. So
Oh, interesting.
lands in Nebraska, and so when it comes to preservation and documentation, as Paul was saying, the people who are the stewards of those sites are private landowners, and so working with private landowners is really the way that archaeology gets done.
I see. And I bet that has its own unique challenges as well. Then,
yeah.
right?
Some people eager to share, some people concerned. They don't necessarily want to share that information with a state agency.
Right.
Right.
Interesting. And Paul, here, of course, it's quite different, right? We have a majority of public lands in New Mexico, especially in San Juan County, of course.
Right, we do, but there's quite a few private lands as well, and so one of the things that we've tried to do, and certainly Larry Baker has done out at Solomon, is to have the partnerships that allow us to get on private lands if the owners are interested, to do some survey, occasionally some excavation, and and of course San Juan College has a very active program with Tommy Bolak working out on the Beast
on his ranch, which is privately owned, sure.
Right,
but he's been very open, I think, of wanting folks to learn from what his property has on it.
Right, and with such a big piece of land, thousands of acres, he has several Chaco outliers, and so Linda Wheelbarger, shout out for Linda.
That's right.
Has worked out.
We shout her out every month.
Right.
I think we do.
For 20 some years, really learning some important things. So yeah, I mean, this is and this isn't new, but these partnerships with public and private landowners, this is really the way that a lot of things get done. And this, going back, a lot of archaeology was done more in the government sector, really as recently as the mid '80s. But I think it's more, and certainly we have a lot of that going on, but the partnerships with different institutions in the private sector and public institutions is really the way a lot of things happen today. So,
right. And that's important. And again, as we talk about these websites that have been produced and can be added to, and more things explained about what we find or what new theories and things along that, it's really open to everyone. Again, it's kind of what the internet's all about, right? Being accessible to everyone, no matter where you are, to be able to check these things out and to learn more about these sites, especially if you're not near where we're talking, or if you're planning a visit or what have you.
And ideally, resources like this also provide a degree of scientific transparency, right? So that if I'm making interpretations about a certain kind of artifact, I can cite the data output from one of these websites, and you or anyone else could go in and download that same set of information and see if you agree.
Right.
So we have access to the same information from which to either agree or disagree.
Exactly, which I think is, again, fascinating. But I find nothing about the aliens or anything like that, though, on any of these sites, Paul Reed. We talk about it all the time.
When we talk, the aliens always seem to come up. A lot of times we'll check the box.
It's when I talk
early. A lot of times when I do Chaco tours, I check that box early on just to kind of be sure that people know they can ask any question, and maybe they go that way. But yeah, and also, as we've discussed, archaeologists are a very contentious bunch. So
that's true. You've told me that before.
It's very important to have the data out there so that we can have that robust discussion. And it people may imagine that it's argument for its own sake, but none of us were there 1,000 years ago, 2,000, 3,000 years ago. So we depend on the quality of the data excavated, many times the quantity even, that we have enough of those little bits of our jigsaw puzzle to put together. And we depend on really, theory from other fields in particular, and then a way to apply those to the data, and then to talk about it. And of course, ultimately, the thing we're doing today, because, I felt this way for a long time, and I know Carrie does, if we're not able to reach out to the public and ultimately say, here's what's important about archaeology, then we're leaving out a big piece of all this.
Sure. Well, and I guess, too, if someone were to come up, another person in your profession were to come up with a different interpretation of the data that's readily available on a website like what we're showing and what's been compiled, and if they have the powers of persuasion, I guess it's their right, like anyone else, to write their own theory, I suppose, right? Or another option of what they believe happened, correct?
Right.
Since none of us were here.
It's a big tent. So, and we welcome all ideas except the alien idea.
I understand.
That's not particularly welcome.
I understand, Dr. Hype.
Yeah, the other thing I might just interject is that, so in addition to providing this degree of scientific transparency, so that, not that Paul and I would ever argue, but that Paul and I, could
but feel free,
look at the same
great radio if you wanted to, so pick a fight anytime.
We should have caffeinated more before I came on. So not only does it allow that degree of scientific transparency, but one of the things that personally, when I'm, not working on projects like this that are about open access and accessibility of information for a public archaeology side, part of my research interest has actually been going back to this information to look at things that people didn't look at before. So one of the things that I've been really keen to research in recent years is the role of women in Chacoan society,
Right.
which is something that just hasn't been a really active area of research in 100 plus years of research on Chaco, and we have lots and lots of information, even though it's not the best resolution of information given the methods of the time in the 1890s and the 1920s and 30s and so on, but there's still just a huge amount of information there. We know from contemporary Puebloan societies and ethnohistoric records, that women were the ones, generally speaking, that were processing maize into meal and making prayer meal, and that these kinds of activities, in addition to having a subsistence side in terms of feeding people, supplying, allowing people to live in these places, also had a ceremonial dimension as well in terms of being able to prepare cornmeal or provision people that had come in for ceremonies, for instance. And so one of the things that's been really interesting to me looking back at these old records is that a lot of the original excavators cared very little about the artifacts that are evident, that things like manos and metates, right?
Right,
for
right.
processing maize, and would often just chuck them, right? So we have these, I wish I had some queued up for you, but, we have these just astounding images of these massive piles, discard piles, for manos and metates from these excavations in the 1920s and 30s and back earlier. And while I can't look at those piles and tell you exactly where those particular items came from, in some cases we actually do have really good documentation from, say, Neil Judd, who was excavating at Pueblo Bonito in the 1920s, where he actually recorded every mano and metate that was found and noted, we discarded 112 manos from this room,
Right.
So we have actually quantitative information about that stuff. So that's been really fruitful, actually, to be able to go back to the documentary record and be able to show the scale of maize production, the
Right,
scale of
right.
women's labor, the scale of women's activities in these spaces, which really changes our perception of what was happening.
Even that data, I suppose, as faulty as it may be today, but the fact that they at least made a record of it or took a photo of the pile gives you an idea of the volume
Absolutely
that you're
right.
talking about, and at least that can help maybe put things in perspective on the size of the site or how many people you thought were there and those types of things, I suppose. And,
Right.
and that, I think, leads to another maybe part of this discussion this morning about what today's discoveries may mean for future archaeologists, because I know you all try to work very carefully and to record every single thing and be very detailed in the work that we do today, so we don't have some of these problems that we're talking about from maybe 100 years ago. And then when you think about your colleagues of the future, when they look at your work, are they going to be on a media show talking about, I don't know what Paul Reed was talking about when he wrote this down, but here we have his records, and we're trying to, is that a P, is that a Q? I don't know what that letter is.
If they're looking at my handwriting, it's not going to be fancy.
Okay, I understand.
But that's why I love the computer age.
Right.
No, that'll certainly be part of it, and I'm sure that Carrie and I and anybody doing this work, we want to leave the best possible information for the future. But the challenge there is we don't know exactly what they're going to be interested in 50 years. So. But I think certainly if we're excavating today, we are much more careful. Just a little statistic for you. About more than half of Pueblo Bonito was excavated in probably a span of 14 years. We're talking about 400 rooms.
Right.
And
that's
we've
quick work, isn't it?
That's just shoveling out, looking for the goodies.
Yeah.
Like Carrie said, chucking the manos and the metates. Solomon Pueblo had excavations in about 80 rooms over roughly 10 years. So even from then, late 1890s, 1920s to 1970s, the work got better. Today, if we were going to do a project, we'd probably, over 10 years, we might be able to look at 10 rooms or 20 rooms, and we would be much more careful about doing it. So I think there's improvement through time, definitely, but I'm sure that our future colleagues will have some criticism that they may or may not share with people of the time about, God, what were these people thinking? Can you believe they did this? The technological advances are really the thing that a lot of us are keyed into now, and so we're very careful about saving things, because I certainly imagine, spectral scanners that will be able to take an artifact like a metate and scan it, and within a matter of seconds have an output on, okay, they were grinding corn and it looks like this species. And
what residue is left, or I guess, or what have you,
just
right?
enough microscopic residue on that, and we're getting to that point, we're not quite there, and that you would be able to take a piece of pottery and put it in the scanner, and it would be able to tell you what was held in that vessel. So, we're getting there. It's still fairly expensive, so we have to pick and choose. But
Sure.
I think the hope on my side, anyway, is that we'll be able to do this more and more, and that'll be a huge part. So we got to be careful. We wash all these items routinely today, and it's like, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing this anymore. Because
Right.
residue analysis, for one, is just really something that's really come on strongly.
Yeah, interesting. Dr. Heitman, again, same projections from you or predictions?
Right. No, I'll just reiterate, that methods are always changing, and this is always the balance that whether it's a National Park Service archaeologist who's in charge of preserving sites, that you're always trying to strike a balance, right, between what new research methods might allow us, what new questions we might be able to answer, while also recognizing that archaeology is a destructive science, and that, you want to preserve as much as you can, either in perpetuity or for some future time when less invasive methods will yield greater research results. The other thing I'll just add to the conversation, not to be gloom and doom, but so much of the records that we create today are digital. And I think that archaeologists really do have a long way to go in terms of being, we'd like to think that everybody's being proactive about preserving their digital records and their spreadsheets of analytical files and things like that. But the reality is that, because so much of that stuff exists in digital file formats that might become outdated or are not necessarily shared broadly by one archaeologist to the other, we run the risk then potentially of losing more information today unless people are really being proactive about depositing their digital data in places like, and I'll give a shout out here to the to Digital Antiquity, the Digital Archaeological Record, or TDAR, which is one repository nationally. I mentioned DINA, but I'll mention TDAR as well, where they're trying to really change the culture within archaeology to get people to have that be part of their workflow. So not only are they publishing this article with this data table, but then they're depositing their raw data in a digital repository to be preserved.
I see. Interesting. And we just have a couple minutes remaining this morning, everybody. And so for these websites that we've been looking at today and the fact that they are kind of preserved digitally and hopefully backed up somewhere,
Sure.
The idea that if anything were to happen to those original artifacts, that we would always have at least this these collections to look back on in a digital way, and thus preserves some of what you've been working on all these years?
Right, exactly. So, like Carrie said, we have a great responsibility to do this. And I just read kind of a depressing report, and Carrie, I think, saw it too, that, basically the government specifically just is not doing enough to preserve the data that goes into BLM Forest Service in a lot of people's hands. So it's not a single finger pointing at any of the agencies. It's just that we don't have the infrastructure in place to do that. And then private individuals, we do archaeological research, we produce statistics and all these things. And like Gary said, most of this is not going anywhere. So, the joke from the past was, these old-time archaeologists had the artifacts and the notes in their garages. Well, we're going to have our data on our hard drives and our laptops from 1990 and 30 years, and nobody's going to be able to read them. So this is something that people are starting to think more and more proactively about.
Interesting.
But it is a potential impact to our field because we're just not printing these data tables out anymore, and nobody's putting those in reports because we don't want to spend the paper, right? And we don't want to produce 200 copies of a report anymore. So
Right, sure.
we have to work harder to have that digital record be available for everyone and to have it backed up and updated. So,
All right. That
big
sounds like
job.
another show. So
Yeah.
we'll talk
Okay.
about that at a different time. But I can't thank you both enough for coming in to talk about this. It's fascinating to me, and I hope to our audience, I think it is. And it's available, again, for folks to go online and check out both of these websites. Again, the Spark Project and the Chaco Canyon Project. The addresses one more time, if you don't mind.
SolomonPueblo.org
Thank you.
and ChacoArchive.org.
There you go, everybody. Perfect. Thank you both for coming in this morning.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure to be here, Scott.
All right. Thank you very much. My guest, Paul Reed, archaeologist Paul Reed from Selman Ruins and Archaeology Southwest, and also Dr. Kerry Heichman from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. My guests here on KSJE. This program on KSJE is supported by Citizens Trust and Investment Corporation, providing a competent, innovative, and caring team of professionals to serve wealth management, trust administration, employee benefit plans, retirement planning, and estate settlement needs. Find out more about Citizens Trust and Investment Corporation at 505-599-0181. KSJE is supported by San Juan Regional Medical Center, Your community hospital with a rich heritage that dates back to before New Mexico was a state. We've been improving the health of the Four Corners since 1910. As a nonprofit hospital, San Juan Regional Medical Center is a values-driven organization. We strive to deliver on our mission to personalize health care and create vitality and enthusiasm in healing. We are here for you when you need us, offering a comprehensive range of inpatient, outpatient,